Francesca Landon's hands trembled as she clutched the crumpled eviction notice, the cruel words blurring through her tears. The dusty main street of Willow Creek seemed to close in around her, as townsfolk stared with a mixture of pity and satisfaction. The year was 1876, and a woman alone in the Arizona Territory had few options and even fewer friends. 2 weeks, she whispered to herself, the hot desert wind catching her words and carrying them away. 2 weeks to vacate the only home I've ever known. The bank had wasted no time after her father's passing. Thomas Landon had been the town's only bookbinder, a gentle soul whose love of literature had never translated to business acumen. The debts he'd left behind were substantial, and the vultures had circled quickly. Francesca lifted her chin, determined not to let the town see her break. At 22, she was unmarried and possessed of what her father's friends called unfortunate modern ideas about a woman's place. Her insistence on helping with the bookbinding rather than seeking a husband had been tolerated when her father lived. Now, it was just another mark against her. "Miss Landon," called Barnaby Wells, the bank manager from the boardwalk, "I hope you understand this is merely business. Perhaps your cousins in Boston might take you in." His voice carried deliberately, ensuring the gathering crowd would hear. "There's simply no future for a woman of your disposition here." Before she could respond with the choice words forming on her tongue, a deep voice cut through the murmurs of the onlookers. "I reckon that's for her to decide, Wells." The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Xavier Cole dismounted from his chestnut stallion. The rancher's tall form cast a long shadow in the late afternoon sun. Dust clung to his denim pants and worn leather vest, evidence of a hard day's work at the Double C Ranch. His face, partially shaded by his wide-brimmed hat, showed lines earned from years under the unforgiving sun, though Francesca knew him to be only 30. Xavier was not a man who came to town often, preferring the open range to Willow Creek's gossip and politics. When he did appear, people noticed. His ranch, 10 miles outside town, was one of the most successful in the territory, and he employed more men than any other operation for 100 miles. "This doesn't concern you, Cole," Wells said, though his voice had lost its authoritative edge. Xavier moved to stand beside Francesca, not quite touching her but close enough that she could smell leather and sage on him. "When you make a public spectacle of a lady's misfortune, you make it everybody's concern." Francesca felt her cheeks flush. "Mr. Cole, while I appreciate the sentiment, I don't need everyone needs allies, Miss Landon," he interrupted softly, his eyes never leaving Wells' face. Then louder, "What's the sum of the debt?" Wells blinked, caught off guard. $437, but that's hardly." Xavier reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. "I'll cover it. Draw up the papers clearing the debt and nullifying the eviction." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Francesca stared at him in disbelief. "Mr. Cole, I couldn't possibly accept. Consider it an investment," he said, finally turning to look at her directly. His eyes were the color of a summer sky, startlingly blue against his sun-darkened skin. "I hear you're as skilled a bookbinder as your father was." "I am," she answered automatically, years of pride in her craft overriding her confusion. "Good. My ranch needs record books, ledgers, proper binding for important documents." He turned back to Wells. "The papers, Wells, I'll wait." The banker sputtered but retreated into his office. The crowd, sensing the drama was over, began to disperse, though with reluctance. "Why would you do this?" Francesca asked quietly when they were relatively alone. "You don't know me." Xavier adjusted his hat, looking down the dusty street rather than at her. "I knew your father, decent man. Read me Dickens when I couldn't make heads or tails of the words myself." He paused. Besides, I've watched you stand your ground in this town for years. That kind of backbone is rare. They said I have no future here, she said, the words bitter on her tongue. Xavier Cole finally met her eyes again, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. Then let's build one together, he said simply. Before she could respond, Wells returned with the papers, his expression sour. Xavier examined them carefully, then signed with a flourish. Miss Landon stays in her home, he announced, loud enough for the lingering townsfolk to hear. Anyone has an issue with that, they can take it up with me. As Wells slunk back into the bank, Xavier handed Francesca the papers. I meant what I said about the books. I'll send a wagon for you tomorrow, noon sharp. Bring your tools and whatever supplies you need. My foreman will show you what we require. Mr. Cole, I appreciate your generosity, but I can't possibly. It's not charity, Miss Landon. It's work. Fair pay for fair work. He tipped his hat. Unless you'd prefer Boston, the thought of leaving the wild, open territory for the confines of her stuffy cousin's home made her stomach turn. No, she said firmly, I wouldn't. Tomorrow, then, noon. He mounted his horse in one fluid motion, and Miss Landon, pack for an extended stay. The rains have washed out the North Road. Once you're at the Double C, you might be there a while. With that, he rode away, leaving Francesca standing in the street with the debt papers clutched to her chest, and an unexpected future suddenly sprawled before her like the vast Arizona horizon. The next morning, Francesca rose before dawn, her mind racing with preparations. She carefully packed her bookbinding tools, the bone folders, awls, needles, and thread, wrapping each in clean cloth, before placing them in her father's old wooden toolbox. Next came the leather pieces she had in stock, various weights and colors that would serve for different types of bindings. The small house behind the bookbindery felt both stifling and achingly dear as she moved through it, selecting clothing and personal items. She had never spent more than a night away from home, and the prospect of an extended stay at the Double C Ranch left her both anxious and curiously exhilarated. By mid-morning, she had packed 2 modest trunks and set them by the door. In the shop front, she carefully locked the cabinets containing her father's precious collection of books volumes that had traveled with him from Philadelphia 20 years earlier, when he'd brought his young bride west, seeking adventure and opportunity. A knock at the shop door startled her from her reverie. The sun wasn't yet at its zenith, too early for Xavier Cole's wagon. She opened the door to find Meredith Taylor, the milliner's wife and one of the few women in town who had shown Francesca genuine kindness over the years. I heard what happened yesterday, Meredith said without preamble, stepping inside. The whole town's talking, Francesca sighed. I imagine they might be. Are you truly going to stay at the Cole Ranch? Meredith asked, her voice low as if sharing a scandalous secret. Alone, to work, yes. Mr. Cole needs bookbinding services. Meredith raised an eyebrow. Xavier Cole has gotten by for years without bound ledgers. He's a cattleman, not an accountant. Nevertheless, he's offered fair work and I've accepted. Francesca moved behind the counter, busying herself with organizing papers that didn't need organizing. Francesca, Meredith said gently, I worry for your reputation. A single woman staying at a bachelor's ranch. There are dozens of ranch hands and a housekeeper there, Francesca countered, though the same concern had kept her awake much of the night. Besides, what choice do I have? The alternative is Boston, Meredith sighed. You know I've always admired your independence, it's just. Xavier Cole is not like the other men in this town. He's not just any rancher. There are stories. What kind of stories? Francesca asked, her curiosity piqued despite herself. He came here 8 years ago with nothing but his horse and a determined look. Within 3 years, he'd acquired the largest spread in the territory. Some say he won it gambling. Others say he bought it with gold he found in the mountains. But no one really knows where he came from or how he got his start. Francesca considered this. That hardly seems sinister. Many come west to reinvent themselves. True enough, Meredith conceded. But there's more. 4 years ago, a band of outlaws tried to rustle his cattle. They were found tied to trees 10 miles apart, each missing a finger. No one's tried to steal from the Double C since. Francesca swallowed hard. Surely that's just frontier exaggeration, perhaps. Meredith didn't sound convinced. All I'm saying is be careful. Cole is respected, even feared, but he's not well known. He keeps to himself. He knew my father, Francesca offered. Said father read Dickens to him. This seemed to surprise Meredith. I didn't know that, she hesitated. Your father was a good judge of character if he befriended Cole, she shrugged. Just promise me you'll be cautious, and if you need anything, send word. I will, Francesca promised, touched by her friend's concern. After Meredith left, Francesca found herself staring at her reflection in the small mirror behind the counter. Her dark auburn hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her green eyes looked larger than usual in her pale face. Was she being foolish, trusting a man she barely knew? Yet something about Xavier Cole's direct gaze and forthright manner had inspired confidence. There had been no condescension in his offer of work, no hint that he considered her less capable because she was a woman. That alone set him apart from most men she'd encountered. The sound of wagon wheels outside pulled her from her thoughts. She glanced at the clock. 11:30. Early. But it wasn't Xavier Cole who stepped through the door. It was his foreman, a weathered man in his 50s whom she recognized from previous visits to town. Miss Landon, he said, removing his hat. Hank Porter, foreman at the Double C. Mr. Cole sent me to fetch you and your things. Mr. Porter, she acknowledged with a nod. I've prepared 2 trunks and my work supplies. Is that all? He seemed surprised. Mr. Cole said to ensure you brought everything you needed for your comfort. This is everything, she said simply. Her father had always valued books over possessions, and their lifestyle had been modest. Porter nodded. Very well, I'll load up. Mr. Cole also asked me to give you this. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a brief note written in a surprisingly elegant hand. Miss Landon, I've arranged for Mrs. Gunderson, our housekeeper, to prepare the east guest room for your stay. She will show you to the study where you can set up your work area. Please consider the Double C at your disposal for as long as necessary. Respectfully, X. Cole. The formality of the note reassured her somewhat. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. Porter loaded her trunks efficiently, then helped her into the wagon. As they pulled away from the bookbindery, Francesca couldn't help looking back at the only home she'd known since childhood. For the first time, uncertainty gave way to a twinge of excitement. Whatever waited at the Double C, it represented something she had thought lost forever: possibility. The journey to the Double C ranch took nearly 2 hours, the wagon following a winding trail that gradually climbed into rolling hills, dotted with juniper and mesquite. As they crested a final rise, the ranch spread out before them, a sprawling main house of stone and timber, surrounded by bunkhouses, stables, and corrals. Beyond, cattle grazed on seemingly endless grassland, the herd numbers speaking to the ranch's prosperity. Mr. Cole started with 50 head, Porter commented, noticing her gaze. Now we're running close to 2,000. Impressive, Francesca murmured, trying to mask her nervousness as they approached the main house. A woman emerged from the front door as they pulled up, broad-shouldered and square-faced, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her expression was stern but not unkind as she watched Porter help Francesca down from the wagon. "Mrs. Gunderson," Porter said by way of introduction. "This is Miss Landon." "Welcome to the Double C," Mrs. Gunderson said, her Norwegian accent still thick despite what Francesca guessed were many years in America. "Your room is ready. Come, I show you." The interior of the ranch house surprised Francesca. She had expected a bachelor's sparse accommodations, but instead found well-crafted furniture, colorful Navajo rugs, and walls lined with bookshelves. Books, more than she'd seen outside her father's shop, their leather spines gleaming in the light streaming through large windows. "Mr. Cole is a reading man," Mrs. Gunderson explained, following Francesca's gaze. "Taught himself, he did. Now he reads everything he can get his hands on." This revelation shifted Francesca's perception of Xavier Cole yet again. A self-taught reader who valued books enough to fill his home with them was not the rough character Meredith's stories had suggested. Mrs. Gunderson led her down a hallway to a sunny room with a view of the eastern ranges. A four-poster bed with a handmade quilt dominated the space, alongside a dresser, washstand, and comfortable chair by the window. "Bathroom is shared at end of hall," Mrs. Gunderson explained. "Mr. Cole has private bath attached to his quarters on West Wing. We are civilized here," she added with a touch of pride. "Hot water for bathing twice weekly, more if needed." Indoor plumbing was a luxury Francesca hadn't expected on a ranch, even one as prosperous as the Double C. Her own home in town relied on an outdoor pump and weekly visits to the bathhouse. "Thank you, Mrs. Gunderson. This is lovely," the housekeeper nodded. "Mr. Cole said to make you comfortable, said you are an important guest." Her eyes assessed Francesca with frank curiosity. "Not many women visit Double C, none stay." Before Francesca could respond to this loaded observation, Mrs. Gunderson continued, "I bring your trunks, then show you study where you work. Mr. Cole will see you at dinner, 6 o'clock. He is punctual man." Left alone, Francesca moved to the window, gazing out at the panoramic view of mountains in the distance. Why had Xavier Cole really brought her here? Was it truly just work, or was there something more to his interest? And why did that possibility send a flutter through her stomach that wasn't entirely unpleasant? She shook her head, dismissing such thoughts. She was here to bind books and earn her keep, nothing more. The fact that her benefactor was an intriguing man with unexpected depths was irrelevant. She had a future to rebuild, and getting distracted by romantic notions would only lead to heartache. Still, as Mrs. Gunderson returned with her trunks and led her to the study, a handsome room with a large desk, good light, and shelves stacked with loose papers awaiting proper binding, Francesca couldn't help wondering what the evening would bring when she finally sat down to dinner with the mysterious Xavier Cole. The study quickly became Francesca's sanctuary. By late afternoon, she had arranged her tools on the sturdy oak desk and examined the ledgers and documents Xavier Cole had accumulated. Many were simply bound with twine or stuffed haphazardly into folders, a bookbinder's nightmare, but a satisfying challenge. She was so absorbed in organizing her work that the grandfather clock in the hallway startling her with its 5 o'clock chime. She would need to refresh herself before dinner with her host. Back in her room, she changed into her best dress, a forest green cotton with modest lace at the collar and cuffs. It wasn't fashionable by Eastern standards, but it was the finest she owned. As she pinned her hair, she found herself unusually concerned with her appearance. This was ridiculous, she scolded herself. This was a business dinner, nothing more. At precisely 6 o'clock, she made her way to the dining room Mrs. Gunderson had pointed out earlier. Xavier Cole was already there, standing by the fireplace. He changed from his work clothes into dark trousers and a crisp white shirt, his hair still damp from washing. Without his hat, she could better see his features, the strong line of his jaw, the slight cleft in his chin, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his temples. He turned as she entered, and for a brief moment, something flashed in his eyes that made her breath catch. Admiration. Surprise. It was gone too quickly to identify. "Miss Landon," he said, crossing to pull out her chair. "I trust you found everything satisfactory." "More than satisfactory, Mr. Cole," she replied, taking her seat. "Your home is beautiful and the study is perfect for my work." He nodded, seeming pleased as he took his own seat across from her. "The Double C started as a one-room cabin. I've added to it over the years." Mrs. Gunderson entered with a tureen of soup, followed by a young Mexican woman carrying a basket of fresh bread. "This is Alina, Mrs. Gunderson introduced. "She helps in kitchen, makes best bread in territory." Alina smiled shyly before retreating to the kitchen. The soup was served a rich beef broth with vegetables that tasted better than anything Francesca had eaten in months. Since her father's illness, cooking had been perfunctory at best. "Tell me what you think of the work ahead," Xavier said as they ate. "Is it something you can manage?" Francesca appreciated that he asked rather than assumed. "Yes, though there's quite a lot. Your operation has generated many records." "A successful ranch requires careful accounting," he replied. "Every head of cattle, every expense and profit." He paused. "Your father understood the value of proper record keeping. He bound the first ledger I ever kept." "Did he?" This confirmed what Xavier had mentioned in town. "You said he read Dickens to you." A shadow of something vulnerability perhaps crossed Xavier's face. "I came west young, never had much schooling. Your father noticed me looking at books in his shop one day. Instead of shooing me out like most would have done, he sat me down and read from Great Expectations, started teaching me letters after that." Francesca felt a rush of warmth for her father's kindness and a new appreciation for the man sitting across from her. That sounds like him. He believed everyone deserved access to knowledge. A rare perspective, especially out here. Xavier's eyes held hers. "You're very much like him in that way. I've seen how you've tried to continue his work, despite the town's resistance." The main course arrived: perfectly roasted beef, potatoes, and early summer vegetables from what Mrs. Gunderson proudly identified as the kitchen garden. As they ate, conversation flowed more easily than Francesca had expected. Xavier asked intelligent questions about her bookbinding techniques, and she found herself explaining the different stitches and materials with growing animation. In turn, he told her about the ranch's operations, speaking of cattle breeding and land management with obvious passion and expertise. "You've built something remarkable here," she observed. Xavier's expression turned reflective. "When I first saw this land, it was neglected, overgrazed. The previous owner didn't understand its potential." His voice softened. "But I could see what it could be." Sometimes the true value of something isn't in what it is, but in what it could become with the right care. The way he looked at her as he said this made Francesca wonder if they were still talking about land. She dropped her gaze to her plate, suddenly flustered. "How did you learn bookbinding?" he asked, mercifully changing the subject. "It's an unusual trade for anyone in these parts, let alone a woman. My father taught me from childhood. I loved watching him work, the precision of it, the transformation of loose pages into something lasting." She smiled at the memory. "By the time I was 12, I was helping with simple bindings. When I was 16, he let me bind my first volume from start to finish, a copy of Emerson's essays." "And the town never approved," Xavier stated rather than asked. "No. They tolerated it while father lived." A daughter helping her father was eccentric but acceptable. A woman continuing the trade alone. She shrugged. Well, you heard Wells. No future here. Wells is a small-minded man running a small-minded bank in a town that's afraid of change, Xavier said, his voice hardening. The territory is changing, Miss Landon. Arizona won't always be the wild frontier. It will need people with skills and vision. The conviction in his voice was compelling. Is that why you helped me? Because you believe in the territory's future? Xavier considered her question carefully. Partly, he admitted, but also because I believe in repaying debts. Your father's kindness changed my life. And, he hesitated, because I've watched you stand your ground in that town for years with dignity and determination. That kind of spirit deserves a chance to flourish. Dessert arrived, apple pie that Alina had baked, interrupting the suddenly charged atmosphere. As they enjoyed the sweet, flaky pastry, Xavier shifted the conversation to lighter topics, asking about books she'd read and sharing his own recent discoveries. By the time they finished, the sun had set, and lamps had been lit around the dining room. Francesca realized with surprise that nearly 2 hours had passed. She couldn't remember the last time she'd enjoyed a conversation so thoroughly. I should let you rest, Xavier said, rising to pull out her chair. You've had a long day of travel and settling in. Thank you for dinner, she said, and for everything else. Your generosity is. She trailed off, unable to find adequate words. I meant what I said yesterday, Miss Landon. This isn't charity. You'll earn your keep here. His voice was firm but kind. I've instructed Mrs. Gunderson to provide whatever you need for your work. If anything is lacking, you need only ask. They stood facing each other in the warm lamplight, and for a breathless moment, Francesca thought he might take her hand or perhaps even. But he simply nodded, a gesture of respect. Good night, Miss Landon. Good night, Mr. Cole. As she made her way back to her room, Francesca felt more alive than she had in months, perhaps years. The conversation replayed in her mind his insights, his unexpected vulnerability about his past, the intensity in his eyes when he spoke of potential and futures. In her room, she moved to the window, gazing out at the star-filled sky stretching endlessly over the Double C Ranch. For the first time since her father's death, she felt something she'd thought lost forever: hope. Whatever Xavier Cole's reasons for bringing her here, whatever the future held, tonight had shown her possibilities she hadn't dared imagine back in Willow Creek. Here, under this vast sky, perhaps she could indeed build something new, a future of her own making. Days at the Double C fell into a rhythm that Francesca found surprisingly comfortable. She rose early, breakfasting in the kitchen with Mrs. Gunderson and Alina, before retreating to the study where she worked through the morning. The ranch's records were extensive, requiring careful organization before the actual binding could begin. She started with the oldest ledgers, transforming loose pages into properly bound volumes with leather covers tooled with the Double C brand. Xavier was often gone from dawn until dusk, overseeing the ranch operations, but they shared dinner each evening. These meals became the highlight of Francesca's days. Xavier proved to be a thoughtful conversationalist with wide-ranging interests, despite his limited formal education. They discussed books, territorial politics, and the changing face of the West with equal enthusiasm. A week into her stay, Francesca was putting the finishing touches on the third ledger when a knock came at the study door. She looked up to find Xavier standing there, his tall frame filling the doorway. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "Not at all." She set aside her bone folder. "Did you need something? Actually, I thought you might appreciate a break." He stepped into the room, examining her completed work with obvious appreciation. "You've been indoors for days. I wondered if you'd like to see more of the ranch." The invitation surprised and pleased her. "I would like that very much." "Good. I've had a horse saddled for you. Do you ride?" "Yes, though not recently," she admitted. Her father had taught her as a child, believing everyone in the territory should know how to ride, but their modest circumstances hadn't allowed for keeping horses. "Daisy is gentle. She'll treat you well." His eyes crinkled with a smile. "And I promise not to take you on any wild gallops across the range." 30 minutes later, Francesca found herself atop a dappled mare, riding alongside Xavier as he showed her the vast expanse of the Double Sea. The afternoon sun was warm but not unbearable, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. After days indoors, the open air felt intoxicating. "How far does your land extend?" she asked as they crested a hill overlooking a verdant valley where cattle grazed peacefully. "To those mountains to the north," Xavier pointed, "the river to the east, and about 15 miles west to the old Spanish Trail." He glanced at her. "Nearly 40,000 acres all told." Francesca tried to comprehend such vastness. "And you manage it all yourself?" "With good men," he corrected. "Porter runs the day-to-day operations. We have 20 hands, more during roundup. The ranch runs on their sweat as much as mine." They rode down into the valley where several cowboys were working with the herd. The men tipped their hats respectfully to Francesca, though she caught curious glances. Clearly, Xavier Cole bringing a woman on his rounds was an unusual occurrence. One of the younger cowboys rode up to them. "Boss, we found tracks again by the North Creek, same as before." Xavier's expression hardened. "How many?" "3, maybe 4 horses. Jenkins followed them a ways but lost the trail in the rocks." "Double the night watch," Xavier ordered. "And tell Porter I want men riding the north boundary in pairs until further notice." The cowboy nodded and rode off. Xavier turned to Francesca, his expression softening. "Sorry about that. Trouble?" she asked. He hesitated. "Possibly. We've had signs of riders scouting the property. Could be nothing, could be rustlers." "Is that common?" "Not for the Double C, not anymore." Something dark flashed in his eyes. "We had problems when I first established the ranch. Made it clear that stealing from us carried consequences." Francesca remembered Meredith's story about outlaws left tied to trees, each missing a finger. She studied Xavier's profile, trying to reconcile the thoughtful man who discussed literature with her over dinner with someone capable of such harsh frontier justice. As if sensing her thoughts, Xavier said quietly, "The territory can be brutal, Miss Landon. Sometimes survival requires being equally harsh." "I understand that," she said, and she did. The West demanded strength. Her own father, gentle as he was, had kept a shotgun under the shop counter and had used it once to drive off would-be robbers. They rode in silence for a while, eventually stopping by a clear creek shaded by cottonwoods. Xavier helped her dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. They sat on a fallen log while the horses drank from the creek. Xavier pulled a canteen from his saddlebag and offered it to her first. "Thank you for showing me your land," Francesca said after taking a drink. "It's beautiful." "It is," he agreed, gazing out at the landscape with unmistakable pride. "When I first came here, this creek was nearly dry. The previous owner had allowed so much overgrazing that the land was starting to die." His voice grew passionate. "Land needs care, just like anything valuable. You have to understand its rhythms, its needs. Take only what it can give without damaging what makes it special." The reverence in his voice moved her. "You love it very much." "It's the first thing that was ever truly mine," he said simply. Something in his tone made her ask, Where did you come from before Arizona? Xavier was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, all over. Orphaned young in Missouri. Worked farms, ranches, whatever would feed me. Drove cattle up from Texas, mined in Colorado. He looked down at his hands, strong and calloused. Never had roots until the double C. And now you've built all this, she said softly. It's remarkable. He looked at her then, his blue eyes intense. People can build remarkable things when given the chance, don't you think? Yes, she agreed, thinking of her own uncertain future. Though sometimes the opportunity is the hardest part to come by. Especially for a woman alone, he acknowledged. That's why what you're doing is brave, Miss Landon, holding to your craft, your independence, despite what the town thinks. It takes courage. His understanding warmed her more than any compliment could have. For so long, she'd felt alone in her determination to maintain her father's legacy and her own independence. To have someone not only recognize her struggle, but admire her for it was unexpectedly validating. Thank you, she said simply. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, listening to the burble of the creek and the occasional lowing of distant cattle. It was a peaceful moment, and Francesca found herself wishing it wouldn't end. Eventually, Xavier stood, offering his hand to help her up. We should head back. Mrs. Gunderson will have dinner waiting, and she's formidable when her cooking is left to cool. Francesca laughed, accepting his hand and trying to ignore the flutter in her chest when their fingers touched. We wouldn't want to face her wrath. As they rode back toward the ranch house, the setting sun painting the landscape in golds and reds, Francesca realized she felt more at ease here with this enigmatic rancher than she had in Willow Creek for years. The thought was both comforting and unsettling. Comfort could lead to complacency, and she couldn't afford to forget that her time at the Double C was temporary, a business arrangement, not a new beginning. Yet as Xavier pointed out a family of deer at the edge of a distant wood, his face alight with simple pleasure at sharing his land with her, Francesca couldn't help wondering if perhaps it could be both. 2 weeks passed in much the same patterned days of focused work, interrupted by occasional rides around the ranch with Xavier when his duties allowed. Francesca found herself looking forward to these excursions with increasing anticipation, not just for the fresh air and exercise, but for the opportunity to learn more about the complex man who had so unexpectedly changed her circumstances. She had completed binding most of the existing ledgers and had moved on to creating new volumes for current records. One afternoon, as she worked in the study, a commotion outside drew her to the window. 3 riders were approaching the main house at speed. One of them slumped forward in his saddle. Curiosity and concern propelled her outside just as Xavier emerged from the barn, alerted by the same disturbance. The injured man was being helped from his horse Jenkins, she recognized, one of the younger cowboys who had been tasked with patrolling the north boundary. What happened? Xavier demanded, moving quickly to support Jenkins's other side. Ambush at North Creek, answered the older cowboy Simmons. 3 riders opened fire on us from the ridge. Jenkins took a bullet in the shoulder. Get him inside, Xavier ordered. Francesca, tell Mrs. Gunderson to prepare hot water and bandages. She hurried to do as asked, alarmed by the grim determination on Xavier's face. Mrs. Gunderson responded with efficient calm, dispatching Alina to heat water while she gathered medical supplies from a cabinet. Clearly, this wasn't the first injury the ranch had seen. The men brought Jenkins into the kitchen, laying him on the large table. The young cowboy's face was gray with pain, his shirt soaked with blood around his left shoulder. Miss, perhaps you should wait elsewhere, Simmons suggested as Mrs. Gunderson began cutting away Jenkins's shirt. Nonsense, the housekeeper interjected. Miss Landon, hold this. She handed Francesca a stack of clean cloths. I need steady hands. For the next half hour, Francesca assisted as Mrs. Gunderson extracted the bullet, cleaned the wound, and stitched it closed. Jenkins bore it stoically, biting down on a leather strap Xavier placed between his teeth. Outside the kitchen, Francesca could hear Xavier questioning the other riders about the attack. You did well, Mrs. Gunderson told her when they had finished bandaging Jenkins's shoulder. Not squeamish, good quality in frontier woman. Will he be all right? Francesca asked, washing blood from her hands in a basin. Yes, bullet missed bone, clean through, he is lucky. The older woman's expression grew serious. But this is bad business, shooting at double C men in daylight. By evening, Jenkins had been moved to a bunk in the main house for easier monitoring, and the ranch was on high alert. Xavier missed dinner, and Francesca ate alone, her mind filled with questions. When she finished, she found herself drawn to the front porch, where she discovered Xavier standing at the railing, staring out into the gathering darkness. You should be inside, he said without turning. It's not safe. Neither should you be standing in plain view, she countered, moving to stand beside him. Who were they? Xavier's jaw tightened. Don't know yet, but I intend to find out. Is it because of the cattle, rustlers? He shook his head. Rustlers don't shoot from ambush without trying to take anything. This was a message. What kind of message? Xavier turned to face her, his expression grave. That someone isn't afraid of the double C, that they can hurt us if they want to. The implications chilled her. Do you have enemies who would do this? A humorless smile touched his lips. Any man who builds something worth having makes enemies along the way. Francesca studied his face in the fading light. The stories about you in town, about outlaws tied to trees, are true, he finished simply. When I first claimed this land, a gang called the Briscoe Boys decided to help themselves to my cattle. They killed 2 of my men. His voice hardened. I tracked them down, made sure they understood the cost of crossing the double C. You didn't kill them. No, death is quick forgotten. I wanted a reminder that would last. He watched her face carefully. Does that change your opinion of me, Miss Landon? Francesca considered the question honestly. Violence repelled her by nature, yet she understood its necessity in a land where law was often distant or non-existent. It tells me you protect what's yours, she said finally. That's not a quality I can fault, even if the methods are harsher than I might choose. Relief flickered across his features. Not many would see it that way. I'm not many, she replied with a small smile. No, he agreed softly. You're not. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was ready to name. Finally, Xavier straightened, his expression becoming businesslike again. I'm doubling the guards tonight. Stay inside, keep your door locked. I don't expect trouble at the house, but I won't take chances with your safety. And yours? She asked. I've survived worse, he said, and she believed him. The next morning brought a visitor to the Double C Sheriff Thomas Riley from Willow Creek, his expression grim as he dismounted in front of the main house. Francesca watched from the study window as Xavier met him in the yard, the 2 men talking intensely before moving toward the bunkhouse where Jenkins was recovering. An hour later, Xavier found her in the study, his face taut with controlled anger. Sheriff Riley brought news, he said without preamble. A man named Victor Blackwood arrived in Willow Creek 3 days ago asking questions about the Double C and about you. Francesca's hands stilled on the book she'd been working on. Me, I don't know anyone by that name. I do. Xavier's voice was dangerously quiet. Blackwood was Briscoe's second in command, the only one of the gang I never caught. He swore revenge before he disappeared. And now he's back, Francesca said, understanding dawning. "The men at the creek." "Almost certainly Blackwood and whoever he's recruited." Xavier raked a hand through his hair. "Riley says Blackwood was particularly interested in your presence here. He's using you to get to me." Fear and indignation warred within her. "Why would my being here matter to him?" Xavier hesitated. "Because in all the years I've run the Double C, I've never brought a woman here. Never shown interest in anyone. It makes you significant." The implication hung in the air between them. In the eyes of an enemy seeking revenge, Francesca represented a potential weakness, a way to hurt Xavier beyond physical harm. "What does Sheriff Riley intend to do?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Not much he can do yet. Asking questions isn't a crime. And the attack happened outside his jurisdiction." Xavier's frustration was evident. "He's promised to keep an eye on Blackwood while he's in town, but that's all." "Then I should return to Willow Creek," Francesca said decisively. "If my presence here is putting your people in danger, no." Xavier's response was immediate and firm. "Willow Creek is where Blackwood is now. You'd be walking right into his reach. But staying here makes me a target that endangers everyone at the Double C," she argued. "You're safest here, surrounded by men loyal to the ranch." His eyes locked with hers. "I won't send you away, Francesca. Not because of this." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the intimacy of it momentarily distracted her from the gravity of the situation. "What will you do? Find Blackwood before he makes another move," Xavier said grimly. "And finish what I started 4 years ago." His words sent a chill through her. "You mean to kill him?" "I mean to protect what's mine." The intensity in his gaze made it clear he included her in that category, though neither of them was ready to acknowledge it directly. That evening, Francesca found sleep elusive. The day's revelations tumbled through her mind: Blackwood's return, Xavier's protective stance, the unspoken but growing connection between them. She had come to the Double C out of necessity, seeking only to preserve her independence and livelihood. Now she found herself entangled in something far more complex and dangerous. Yet beneath her concern lurked an uncomfortable truth. In the 2 weeks she'd spent at the ranch, she had come to care deeply for Xavier Cole. His strength and determination, his unexpected gentleness, his respect for her work and mind all had combined to forge a bond she hadn't anticipated. A soft knock at her door startled her from these thoughts. Hand trembling slightly, she pulled on a robe over her nightgown and called, "Who is it?" "Xavier," came the quiet response. She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, fully dressed despite the late hour. The gravity in his eyes alarmed her. "What's happened?" "Nothing yet," he assured her. "But one of our men spotted riders watching the ranch from the North Ridge. They're out there waiting." Francesca's heart raced. For what? An opportunity? A weakness? His gaze was steady. "I'm leaving before dawn with 10 men. We're going to find Blackwood's camp and end this." "That's dangerous," she protested. "You said yourself there could be several of them." "Better to face them on our terms than wait for another ambush." He hesitated. "I needed you to know, in case." "Don't," she interrupted, unable to bear the implication. "Don't speak as if you might not return." In the dim light of the hallway, Xavier's expression softened. "I've survived a lot, Francesca. I intend to survive this too." He paused. "But if something happens, Mrs. Gunderson has instructions. The ranch hands will see you safely back to Willow Creek. And there are papers in my desk, the deed to your father's shop and home. It's yours, free and clear." Emotion welled in her throat. "I never asked for that, I know." His voice was gentle. "But I want you to have a choice, a future whatever happens." Without thinking, Francesca reached out, her fingers brushing his hand. "Be careful, Xavier, please." He caught her hand, his thumb tracing a gentle circle on her palm. The simple touch sent warmth spiraling through her. "I will." For a breathless moment she thought he might pull her closer, but instead he released her hand with evident reluctance. "Try to sleep. Porter will be in charge while I'm gone. He'll keep you safe." As he turned to go, Francesca called softly. "Xavier," he looked back. "Come back. That's all I ask." His eyes held hers, filled with promises neither of them had yet voiced aloud. "I will," he repeated, and this time it sounded like a vow. Long after he'd gone, Francesca stood at her window, gazing out at the star-filled sky above the double sea. Her heart filled with prayers for the safe return of a man who had, against all expectations, become essential to her happiness. The following day passed with excruciating slowness. Francesca tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept wandering to Xavier and his men, imagining confrontations and gunfire in the rugged landscape beyond the ranch. Mrs. Gunderson and Alina moved through their tasks with tense efficiency, and the remaining ranch hands stayed alert, rifles close at hand. By evening, with no word from Xavier's party, the atmosphere in the main house had grown heavy with unspoken worry. Francesca picked at her dinner, unable to eat despite Mrs. Gunderson's encouragement. After the meal, she retreated to the front porch, needing fresh air to clear her head. The sunset painted the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples, a beauty that seemed almost offensive given her anxiety. She had just decided to return inside when the distant sound of hoofbeats caught her attention. Shading her eyes against the setting sun, she made out riders approaching from the east. Many riders. Porter emerged from the bunkhouse, rifle in hand, and several other hands appeared, similarly armed. "Get inside, Miss Landon," Porter called, his voice tense. "Is it them?" she asked, heart pounding. "Is it Xavier?" Before Porter could answer, one of the cowboys with sharper eyes shouted, "It's the boss, and they've got prisoners." Relief nearly buckled Francesca's knees. She remained on the porch, watching as the riders drew closer. Xavier led them, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. Behind him came his men, surrounding 3 riders with their hands bound, heads bowed in defeat. As they reached the ranch yard, Francesca could see that Xavier's shirt was torn and bloodstained on one side, but he sat straight in the saddle, his face set in grim triumph. His eyes found her immediately, and some of the hardness left his expression. "Get these men secured in the storehouse," he ordered his cowboys. "2 guards at all times. Riley will be here by morning to take them to the territorial prison." As his men led the prisoners away, Xavier dismounted with a slight wince that betrayed his injury. Francesca hurried down the porch steps toward him. "You're hurt," she said, reaching him just as Porter did. "It's nothing," Xavier assured them both. "Bullet grazed my side, already stopped bleeding." "Mrs. Gunderson should look at it," Porter insisted. "She will," Xavier agreed, his eyes never leaving Francesca's face. "We found their camp near Thunder Canyon. Blackwood had 5 men with him. 2 didn't survive the encounter." "And Blackwood?" she asked quietly. A shadow crossed Xavier's features. "Among the deceased. He chose to fight rather than surrender." The finality in his voice told Francesca all she needed to know. Whatever had happened in that canyon, Xavier had done what he felt necessary to protect the double C and her. "I'm glad you're back," she said simply. Something in her tone made his expression soften. "As am I." That night, after Mrs. Gunderson had cleaned and bandaged Xavier's wound, indeed just a deep graze that looked worse than it was, Francesca found herself unable to sleep despite her relief. The events of the past days had crystallized feelings she could no longer ignore or deny. Just after midnight, she gave up on sleep and wrapped herself in a shawl before making her way to the front porch. The night was clear and cool, stars blazing overhead in the vastness of the Arizona sky. She wasn't entirely surprised to find Xavier already there, standing at the railing in the moonlight. He had changed into a clean shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, and his hair was still damp from washing. "You should be resting," she said softly as she joined him. "As should you." He turned to face her, his expression unguarded in a way she hadn't seen before. "But I find sleep elusive tonight." "As do I," she admitted. "Too many thoughts." They stood in silence for a moment, the nighttime sounds of the ranch, distant cattle, the soft nickering of horses in the corral, the whisper of wind through junipers surrounding them. "It's over now," Xavier said finally. "Blackwood can't hurt anyone anymore. The others will face territorial justice." "I'm glad," Francesca said, "not for the deaths, but for the end of the threat." Xavier studied her face in the moonlight. "You've shown remarkable courage through all this. Most women would have been terrified, demanded to leave." "I was afraid," she admitted, "but not of staying. I was afraid for you, for what might happen if you confronted Blackwood." The simple honesty of her words seemed to touch something deep within him. "Francesca," he said, his voice lower, more intimate than she'd heard before. "These past weeks, having you here, it's changed things, changed me." Her heart quickened. "How so?" "Before you came, the Double C was just land and cattle, valuable, worth protecting, but—" He struggled for words, unusual for a man typically so direct. "Since you've been here, it's started to feel like something more, like a home." The admission, so plainly stated yet so profound, moved her deeply. "Xavier, when you brought me here, I thought it was just temporary, a way to keep working until I could return to Willow Creek. And now?" he asked, a vulnerability in his question that belied his strength. "Now I'm not sure I want to go back," she confessed. "The thought of returning to that shop, alone with my books while the town waits for me to fail." She shook her head. "Here I've found purpose, respect, and—" She hesitated, gathering courage, "and feelings I didn't expect." Xavier moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool night air. "What kind of feelings?" Instead of answering with words, Francesca reached up, her fingers gently touching his cheek. The contact seemed to break something loose in Xavier. He drew her into his arms with a tenderness that contrasted with his physical strength, one hand cradling the back of her head as he bent to press his lips to hers. The kiss began gently, almost tentatively, but quickly deepened as months of unacknowledged longing, his for connection, hers for understanding, merged into something powerful and undeniable. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly. "I've wanted to do that since the day you stood up to Wells in the middle of Willow Creek," Xavier admitted, his forehead resting against hers. Francesca laughed softly. "Even while I was yelling, especially then. Your spirit, your determination." His thumb traced the curve of her cheek. "I knew then I couldn't let you leave. Is that why you offered to pay my father's debt? To keep me in Arizona?" "Partly," he acknowledged. "But also because it was the right thing to do. Wells and his kind would have driven you out, and the territory would have lost something precious." His eyes, silver blue in the moonlight, held hers. "I didn't expect to fall in love with you, Francesca. But I have." The words, spoken so simply yet with such evident feeling, filled her with joy. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I started falling the moment you said we could build a future together." Xavier smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "I meant it then. I mean it even more now." He took her hands in his. "Stay, Francesca, not as my bookbinder, but as my partner, my wife. Help me make the Double C not just a successful ranch, but a true home." The proposal, direct and heartfelt like everything about Xavier, brought tears to her eyes. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll stay. I'll be your wife." He kissed her again, this time with a passion that spoke of futures and promises and dreams shared. When they separated, Xavier kept her close, his arm around her waist as they looked out over the moonlit expanse of the double sea. "They said you had no future in Willow Creek," he murmured against her hair. Francesca smiled, leaning into his embrace. "They were right. My future was always meant to be here with you." In the weeks that followed, news of their engagement spread quickly through the territory. In Willow Creek, reactions were mixed. Some expressed surprise that Xavier Cole had finally found a bride. Others whispered that Francesca Landon had managed quite a coup in securing one of the wealthiest ranchers in Arizona. Barnaby Wells, upon hearing the news, merely pursed his lips and muttered about peculiar matches. Meredith Taylor, however, was genuinely delighted for her friend. "I had my concerns when you first went to the Double C," she admitted when she visited the ranch to help with wedding preparations. "But seeing you two together, it's clear as day you belong with each other." The wedding took place on a perfect October afternoon, with the mountains providing a majestic backdrop to the ceremony held in the Double C's newly constructed garden. Francesca wore a gown of ivory silk ordered from San Francisco, and Xavier looked uncommonly handsome in a new black suit. Mrs. Gunderson wept openly, while Porter and the ranch hands cheered enthusiastically when Judge Peterson pronounced them husband and wife. Even Sheriff Riley, who had successfully delivered Blackwood's surviving men to the territorial prison, attended with his wife, presenting the couple with a finely crafted silver picture frame. "For your first family portrait," he said with a wink. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing under lantern light. As the festivities wound down, Xavier led his new wife away from the gathering, toward a grove of cottonwoods lit by the rising moon. "Happy, Mrs. Cole?" he asked, drawing her into his arms. "Completely," Francesca answered truthfully, "though I'm still getting used to the name." "It suits you," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Almost as much as the Double C suits you." She smiled, thinking of how quickly the ranch had come to feel like home. In the months since her arrival, she had not only bound Xavier's books, but had begun to transform the main house with her touch. New curtains in the parlor, bookshelves reorganized by subject, a writing desk placed near the best window in their shared bedroom. "I have something for you," Xavier said, reaching into his pocket. "A wedding gift." He pressed a small velvet pouch into her hand. Inside, Francesca found a delicate gold key on a chain. "What does it open?" she asked. Xavier's smile was both tender and excited. "Come with me." He led her to a section of the ranch she hadn't visited before, a small rise beyond the main house where a new structure stood, its windows glowing with warm light. "What is this?" she asked as they approached. "See for yourself," he invited, gesturing to the door where a brass plaque read simply, "Landon and Cole Bookbinders." With trembling fingers, Francesca used the key to unlock the door. Inside was a spacious workshop, complete with every tool and material a bookbinder could desire. Large windows would provide perfect natural light during the day, while copper lamps hung from the ceiling for evening work. A massive oak worktable dominated the center of the room, and along one wall stood a printing press. "Xavier," she breathed, stunned by the thoughtfulness of the gift. I don't know what to say." "Your father built a business bringing books and knowledge to the frontier," Xavier said, watching her face with evident pleasure. "I thought you might want to continue that legacy on your own terms." He gestured to the printing press. "The territory needs a newspaper, educational materials for the children who will come as towns grow. Who better to provide that than someone who understands the value of knowledge?" Overwhelmed, Francesca wrapped her arms around her husband, burying her face against his chest. "It's perfect," she managed through tears of joy. Absolutely perfect. Xavier tilted her face up to his. You said once that they told you there was no future for you in Willow Creek. I promised we'd build one together. His eyes, so often guarded before she knew him, now shone with open love. This is just the beginning, Francesca. The Double C isn't just cattle and land anymore. It's a foundation for everything we want to create together. As he sealed this promise with a kiss, Francesca knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a husband, but a true partner, someone who valued her mind and spirit as much as her heart. Together, they would build something lasting on this wild frontier, a legacy born of love and mutual respect that would endure long after them. Spring came early to the Double C the following year, bringing with it new calves, wildflowers carpeting the valleys, and the completion of Francesca and Xavier's first major project together, a small schoolhouse built near the main ranch house. Though initially intended for the children of ranch hands, word had spread, and families from outlying homesteads had begun sending their children as well. We'll need a proper teacher soon, Francesca observed one evening as she and Xavier sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Her hand rested on her slightly rounded belly, their first child due in late summer. I can manage for now, but once the baby comes. Xavier covered her hand with his own, his touch gentle. I've written to a teaching college in Denver. They may have graduates willing to come to the territory. He smiled. Though no one will teach them to love books the way you do. Francesca leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. The past year had transformed the Double C from a successful cattle operation into the beginnings of a community. Beyond the schoolhouse, they had established a small lending library using duplicate volumes from Xavier's collection, supplemented by new books Francesca ordered from publishers back east. Her bookbindery had flourished as well. What began as a service for the ranch had expanded to include work for businesses throughout the territory. The printing press now produced not only record books, but also a monthly newsletter about territorial affairs that circulated as far as Tucson. Did you ever imagine this? She asked, gesturing to the buildings that had sprung up around the original ranch house, the school, the bindery, the expanded bunkhouses for the growing number of hands and their families. When you first claimed this land, Xavier considered the question. I imagined building something lasting, he said thoughtfully. Something that would matter, but no, I never envisioned all this. He pressed a kiss to her temple. That's your influence, Francesca. You brought life and purpose beyond just survival. From the direction of the bunkhouses came the sound of a fiddle starting up, soon joined by a harmonica and rhythmic clapping. Saturday night music had become a tradition, another small touch of civilization taking root in the wilderness. Dance with me, Xavier asked, standing and offering his hand. Francesca laughed. Out here. With no proper floor, the stars are our ceiling, the earth our floor, he replied with uncharacteristic poetry. Dance with me, Mrs. Cole. How could she refuse? In the fading light, with their ranch flourishing around them and new life growing within her, Francesca stepped into her husband's arms. As they swayed to the distant music, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the brink of losing everything to finding more than she had ever dreamed possible. They said I had no future, she murmured against Xavier's chest. He tightened his arms around her. They were wrong. Your future was always here, waiting for you to claim it, for us to build it together. As darkness settled fully over the Double C, the stars emerged in their thousands, bearing witness to a promise fulfilled, and a love that had transformed not just two lives, but an entire corner of the wild, beautiful Arizona territory. Where once there had been only Xavier Cole's determination, to carve a place for himself in the unforgiving West. Now there was a home, a family, and the foundation of a legacy that would endure for generations to come. In the soft, desert night, Francesca and Xavier continued their dance, moving to music that seemed to come from the land itself, a melody of belonging, of purpose found, of love that had defied expectations and created something new and wonderful on the frontier. Their story, which had begun with a chance encounter on a dusty street in Willow Creek, was far from over. Indeed, it was still being written, day by day, in the life they were creating together at the Double C Ranch, a testament to the power of believing in possibilities, even when others see only limitations. As summer approached, Francesca's pregnancy progressed, bringing with it both joy and the natural concerns of a first-time mother so far from conventional medical care. Xavier, protective as ever, arranged for a midwife from a neighboring settlement to stay at the Double C for the final month before the birth. Martha Blackburn was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had delivered more babies than she could count, and quickly won Francesca's trust with her competent manner and vast experience. "You're healthy as a horse," Martha assured her after an examination in early July. "Baby's positioned right. Nothing to fret about." Despite these reassurances, Xavier grew increasingly attentive as Francesca's time drew near. He rearranged ranch operations to stay closer to home, delegating more responsibility to Porter and the senior hands. At night, he would rest his hand on her belly, marveling at the strong kicks of their child. "Active," he observed with pride. "Like their mother." Francesca smiled, covering his hand with hers. "Or determined like their father." The baby, a boy they named Thomas Xavier Cole, after both Francesca's father and his own arrived in mid-August following a labor that Martha deemed unremarkable, much to everyone's relief. Xavier, who had paced the porch throughout the ordeal, refusing Porter's offers of whiskey, was the first person besides Martha to hold his son. "He's perfect," he whispered, carefully placing the swaddled infant in Francesca's arms. The look of wonder and love on his face, this man who had faced down outlaws without flinching, brought tears to her eyes. "Hello, Thomas," she murmured to their son. "Welcome to the Double C." Life adjusted to accommodate their new addition. Xavier had a cradle built by one of the hands who had previously been a carpenter, placing it first beside their bed, and later in the nursery he had prepared adjacent to their bedroom. Francesca found that motherhood, while demanding, fit naturally alongside her other roles at the ranch. She would often work in the bindery with Thomas sleeping nearby, the rhythmic sounds of her tools apparently soothing to the infant. By Thomas's first birthday, the Double C had continued its transformation. The school now had a proper teacher, Miss Harriet Walsh, a 26-year-old graduate from Denver with progressive ideas about education that aligned perfectly with Francesca and Xavier's vision. The settlement around the ranch had grown to include a small general store operated by a former ranch hand and his wife, providing basics that previously required a trip to Willow Creek. Word of the community developing at the Double C spread throughout the territory. Families seeking a fresh start, craftsmen looking for opportunity, and even a young doctor recently graduated from medical school back east found their way to the ranch. Xavier, recognizing the potential, began selling small parcels of land at fair prices to those willing to contribute to the growing settlement. "We're becoming a proper town," Francesca observed one evening as they sat reviewing a map of the ranch property, now marked with the locations of new homesteads and businesses. "Seems that way," Xavier agreed, "though we'll need a name better than the Double C settlement if that's the case." Francesca considered this. What about Landon's Crossing? There's the ford over the creek where the new road comes in." Xavier smiled, recognizing her tribute to her father. "I like it. We'll propose it at the next community meeting." The name was adopted unanimously, and by the time Thomas was 2, Landon's Crossing appeared on territorial maps as an official settlement. The former bookbinder's daughter, who had been told she had no future in Willow Creek, now found herself the co-founder of a thriving community, respected not just as Xavier Cole's wife, but as a businesswoman and civic leader in her own right. Their family grew again with the birth of their daughter, Grace Eleanor, when Thomas was 3. Xavier, if possible, became even more besotted with his gentle daughter, whose auburn hair matched her mother's. Watching him read bedtime stories to both children, his deep voice softening as he created different voices for each character, Francesca often reflected on how completely her life had transformed in the years since that fateful day in Willow Creek. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Xavier surprised Francesca with a journey, their first significant time away from the Double C since their marriage. He arranged for Mrs. Gunderson and Miss Walsh to care for the children, assuring Francesca that the ranch and community would function perfectly well during their 2-week absence. "Where are we going?" she asked as their carriage headed east from Landon's Crossing. "First to Tucson," Xavier replied mysteriously. "After that, you'll see." In Tucson, they boarded a train, a novelty that had only recently reached the Arizona territory. As the locomotive pulled away from the station, Xavier handed Francesca an envelope containing tickets to San Francisco. "The coast," she gasped, excitement building. She had never seen the ocean, having traveled west with her parents as a small child via an inland route. "I thought it was time you saw something beyond Arizona," Xavier said, pleased by her reaction. "And I have business interests to explore there as well." San Francisco dazzled them both with its sophistication and energy. They stayed in a luxurious hotel overlooking the bay, dined in fine restaurants, and attended the theater. Francesca purchased books unavailable in the territory and arranged for regular shipments to the Landon's Crossing library. Xavier, meanwhile, met with investors interested in the expanding opportunities of the Arizona territory. On their final evening in the city, they walked along the shoreline as the sun set over the Pacific. Francesca, breathless with the beauty of it, turned to find Xavier watching her rather than the spectacular sunset. "What?" she asked, self-conscious under his intense gaze. "I was just thinking," he said, taking her hands in his, "about how different my life would be if I hadn't seen you standing up to Wells that day, if I hadn't spoken up. Or if I had refused your offer and gone to Boston," she added. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Staying in the territory, building a life with me instead of finding adventure elsewhere?" Francesca looked up at this man, who had become the center of her world, still strong and capable as the day they met, but softened now by years of family life and the shared work of building something meaningful together. "Never," she said with complete conviction. "Adventure isn't always about going somewhere new, Xavier. Sometimes it's about staying put and creating something that wasn't there before." She gestured toward the ocean. "This is beautiful, and I'm grateful you've shown it to me. But our life at the Double C, Landon's Crossing, our children, that's the real adventure." Xavier drew her close, kissing her with a passion undiminished by 5 years of marriage. "When we return," he murmured against her lips, "I have one more surprise for you." True to his word, upon their return to Landon's Crossing, Xavier revealed his final anniversary gift, the deed to a new, larger building in the center of the growing settlement, designated as the permanent home for the Landon's Crossing Gazette and Library. "Your father believed in the power of books and knowledge to transform lives," Xavier said as they stood before the handsome brick structure. "This ensures his legacy and yours will continue for generations." Francesca, deeply moved, leaned into her husband's embrace. "When I was a girl, my father used to say that books were windows to worlds we might never see otherwise. But he also said that the most important stories are the ones we write with our own lives." She looked up at Xavier, her eyes shining with emotion. "I think he would be proud of the story we've written together." "And it's far from finished," Xavier reminded her, his arms secure around her waist. "We have chapters yet to come." As they walked home to their children, the setting sun cast long shadows across Landon's Crossing, a community born from one man's vision and one woman's determination to forge her own path. What had begun with a simple statement, "They said she had no future here," had blossomed into something neither could have imagined when they first stood together on that dusty street in Willow Creek. The years rolled on, bringing growth and change to both the Cole family and Landon's Crossing. Thomas and Grace were joined by a third child, Samuel James, when Grace was 4. Xavier, watching his family expand, built additions to their home at the Double C, ensuring there was room for their growing brood and the frequent visitors who sought Francesca's counsel or Xavier's business advice. As the children grew, so did the settlement. By 1890, Landon's Crossing had a population approaching 500, with a proper schoolhouse, church, doctor's office, and various businesses serving the needs of both town residents and the surrounding ranches. The Gazette, now published weekly under Francesca's guidance, had subscribers throughout the territory. Xavier, though still actively involved in ranching operations, had diversified the Double C-Ticket's interests to include investments in mining, the railroad, and various enterprises in Landon's Crossing itself. His business acumen, combined with Francesca's community vision, had created prosperity that extended beyond their own family. On Thomas's 16th birthday, a tall, serious young man who resembled his father in both appearance and temperament, Xavier, presented him with his own section of the Double C to manage. "Time you learned the business from the ground up," he told his son. "Just as I did." Thomas accepted the responsibility with characteristic determination, though Francesca noted with amusement that her eldest still found time to court the schoolteacher's daughter when his ranching duties allowed. Grace, at 13, showed a natural aptitude for her mother's love of books and learning. She had already begun assisting at the library and had announced her intention to attend college in California when she was old enough, a plan her parents fully supported. Samuel, their unexpected blessing at age 8, combined his father's adventurous spirit with his mother's intellectual curiosity, creating a combination that both delighted and exhausted his parents. "That boy will either discover something remarkable or drive us to distraction trying," Xavier often observed with affectionate resignation. One evening in the summer of 1892, as Francesca and Xavier sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage, a rider approached from the direction of town. The messenger delivered a telegram that had arrived at the Landon's Crossing office. Xavier read it, his expression growing serious before handing it to Francesca. The message was from Barnaby Wells's son in Willow Creek, informing them that the elder Wells had passed away and, surprisingly, had left instructions in his will for Xavier Cole to be offered the first opportunity to purchase the Willow Creek Bank. Why would he do that? Francesca wondered aloud. Wells never approved of either of us. Xavier considered this. Maybe he recognized good business sense, even if he didn't care for our methods. Or perhaps he saw what we built here and understood what we might do for Willow Creek. "Do you want to buy it?" she asked, curious. "I'm not sure," Xavier admitted. "Willow Creek has struggled since the railroad bypassed it for Tucson, but with the right investment—" He glanced at her. "What do you think? It was your hometown after all." Francesca thought about the town that had once deemed her without prospects, the place she had been so eager to leave behind. "It's ironic," she said finally. "They said I had no future there, and now we're in a position to shape its future." Xavier took her hand, his touch still sending a thrill through her after all these years. "We could make changes, help it grow the way Landon's Crossing has, but with the benefit of experience." The prospect appealed to her sense of poetic justice, but there was more to it than that. "There are good people there, like Meredith Taylor, people who deserve the opportunity to thrive." She squeezed his hand. "Let's do it. Let's help Willow Creek find its second chance." The acquisition of the Willow Creek Bank was just the beginning. Over the next few years, Xavier and Francesca invested in revitalizing the struggling town, bringing in new businesses, helping to secure a spur line from the railroad, and establishing a school modeled after the successful one in Landon's Crossing. Their frequent presence in Willow Creek created an interesting dynamic. Some old-timers remembered Francesca as Thomas Landon's peculiar daughter and viewed her return as a successful businesswoman with mixed emotions. Others, however, welcomed the prosperity and opportunities the Coles brought with them. On one such visit, as they walked down the main street that had once been the site of her humiliation, Francesca noticed the old bookbindery. The building had passed through several owners since her departure but now stood empty, its windows dusty and sign faded. "Wait," she told Xavier, stopping to look more closely. Memories flooded back, her father teaching her to bind her first book, long evenings reading by lamplight, the fear and uncertainty after his death. Xavier, understanding immediately, asked quietly, "Do you want it back?" Francesca considered the question. "Not to live in," she decided. "Our home is at the Double C, but—" An idea formed. What if we created another library, a memorial to my father, a place where anyone in Willow Creek could access books and knowledge just as he would have wanted? Xavier smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners, a feature she had always loved. "The Thomas Landon Memorial Library," he suggested. "A fitting tribute." Within 6 months, the transformed bookbindery opened its doors as Willow Creek's first public library. At the dedication ceremony, Francesca stood before a crowd that included many who had once doubted her ability to survive without a husband, let alone thrive. "My father believed that books could change lives," she told them, her voice clear and confident. "He came west with that belief, bringing knowledge and stories to a frontier that desperately needed both. Today, we honor his vision by ensuring that knowledge remains accessible to all who seek it." As she spoke, she caught sight of Barnaby Wells's widow in the audience, the woman's expression thoughtful rather than dismissive as it once would have been. Beside Mrs. Wells sat Meredith Taylor, now a grandmother herself, beaming with pride at her friend's accomplishment. After the ceremony, as well-wishers dispersed, Xavier found Francesca standing in what had once been her father's workroom, now filled with reading tables and bookshelves. "Happy?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "Very," she replied, leaning into his familiar strength. "It feels like completing a circle somehow, returning to where it all began but as a different person." "Not so different," Xavier countered. "Still stubborn, still passionate about books, still determined to do things your own way." His tone made these observations compliments rather than criticisms. Francesca laughed, turning in his arms to face him. At 42, Xavier's hair showed touches of silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but he remained as handsome and vital as the day they met. And you're still the man who saw possibility where others saw only limitations. Best decision I ever made, he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead, telling you we could build a future together. Did you mean it then? She asked curiously. Or was it just a kind thing to say to a woman in distress? Xavier's expression grew serious. I meant it, though I didn't know then how completely you would become part of that future. He paused, his eyes holding hers. I was lonely before you, Francesca. Had everything a man could want materially, but nothing that truly mattered. The simple honesty of his admission touched her deeply. In all their years together, Xavier had rarely spoken of his feelings so directly, preferring to show his love through actions rather than words. We built something wonderful together, she agreed softly. More than I ever dreamed possible that day in the street. As they left the library hand in hand, stepping into the Willow Creek sunshine, Francesca felt a sense of completion. The town that had once declared she had no future now served as testament to all she and Xavier had accomplished together. Their legacy stretched across 2 communities, touched countless lives, and would continue through their children and the institutions they had built. Back at the Double C that evening, with Thomas discussing cattle prices with his father, Grace reading by the fire, and Samuel regaling Mrs. Gunderson with his latest adventure, Francesca felt a contentment so profound it nearly overwhelmed her. From the lonely, frightened young woman facing eviction to the matriarch of a thriving family and co-founder of a community, her journey had been remarkable by any measure. Later, as she and Xavier prepared for bed, he caught her in a tender embrace. Thinking deep thoughts, he asked, recognizing her contemplative mood. Just grateful, she replied, resting her head against his chest. For you, for our life together, for that day in Willow Creek when you changed everything. Xavier lifted her chin gently, his blue eyes as intense as they had been on that fateful day 16 years earlier. We changed everything, he corrected. Together, just as we promised. As moonlight filtered through their bedroom window, illuminating the life they had built from dreams and determination, Francesca and Xavier sealed this truth with a kiss, a reminder that the greatest adventures often begin with a single act of courage, and the belief that, together, anything is possible.